Thanks for listening to the Healthy Church Podcast with Larry Barker and Drew Klein.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Healthy Church Podcast. Larry, it's good to see you this morning, brother. How are you doing?
Doing well. Been running, but what's new? Just staying busy, and I am not griping. You know me well enough. I like busy.
Yeah, I wouldn't know your setting if like every other one you weren't in a hotel room somewhere. So yeah, that's what you do, man. You go.
Jackson. Yeah, I'm in Jackson, Mississippi today, and helped with a missions conference with the BMA of Mississippi in the south. Now we're going to a church in the north, so the churches up there can come. We've had a great time.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk this morning about the C word. It's a difficult word to deal with in the church. I know that much, but that is change, right? Is that where we're going today?
Yeah, it is. And our good friend, Dr. John David Smith, was teaching on this yesterday, and it was interesting. I taught right before him, and I taught on it, and then he took some points about what to expect after you lead the change, and I just thought it was gold, and I wanted to share it with our listeners today.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, it's a topic that I'm familiar with, and that I've led some change and have got the scars to prove it. But it's not an easy thing to do, I mean, we all have to be willing to change because times change and things change, and we have to try and carry the gospel truth and the commission of Jesus forward. But to make change is not an easy thing to do. We're creatures of habit, aren't we?
We are. And I'll say this, and I'll caution, if you're changing just to change, that is triple dangerous. It's already dangerous enough. But if you're just changing to change, be careful. Be very, very careful. But there are many times things do change. We have to change. We have to be aware of that. And so we just wanted to talk a little bit about how to lead change. Before we got on and started the recording, you brought up two things. I said we do it in the middle, but man, let's do that right now, because we got to remind everyone the first step to change is on your face before God.
No question.
We got to have an environment of prayer. In our Healthy Church Solutions, this is the Healthy Church Podcast, when you get a hold of me or you get a hold of Heidi, who works with me, we're going to push you towards a prayer environment and developing a prayer culture. And that begins with the leader. Are we on our faces before God? Are we crying out to Him? Are we seeking Him? Bill Elliff's great book, God-Initiated Leadership. That's where it starts.
Right, because it's not our church, it's His church, and we're His people. And so we don't try to say, here's where I want to go. It's like, Lord, this is all about you. I surrender to what you want to do and how you want to do it. And if that is not the heart and the attitude and environment even of the people, and you're bringing people into that environment, and the whole church is creating an environment of prayer, I don't think change will happen. Or if it does, if it doesn't, I think that the purpose will be, or the result will be as a result of not going to that place, but just thinking, okay, I've got the answers, and this is what I want to do, and just moving forward without that sensitivity to whose church it is.
Yeah, and Drew, you brought up the second thing, so talk about that a little bit. What happens for change to occur?
Well, as we were I'm just this morning just praying through and thinking through some of the things in this topic, and of course I'm pretty close to our own story in that God called me. I've been a worship leader for over 30 years. Served in a lot of churches around the country and on the road in different places, and love pastoring people. But I had always done that in a number two kind of a role in a setting where I supported. I've eldered. I've done those things. But God called me to lead and to come over and to be the lead pastor for Temple Baptist Church. We replanted at South City, And the whole thing I was just thinking this morning is when it comes to change, and we've made a decent amount of changes there, is at least in our story, God seems to call a change maker and a catalyst. And a catalyst is somebody who causes change, who helps look at a certain way of doing things and goes, I think we can do this differently as a result of outcomes. And so as you're thinking about your environment, I think you have to go, okay, let's look at the outcomes we're producing. Are we producing disciples? Are we on mission? Are our people living lives of worship? What are the outcomes of what we're producing right now? And if it's not those things, then we've got to make change and we've got to get on our face. And I believe the Lord will call somebody to help lead that change. It doesn't mean they run the place necessarily or they're in charge of everything. It just means that he gives them a vision and a place where they can come and build a team and an environment of that change.
Yeah, that catalyst is so important, that feels that calling. And you referred to Nehemiah earlier, and what a great example of that. But we could name Moses and the burning bush experience that he had, and you talk about change. Wow. But Nehemiah, and there's others. We could name many others from the scriptures. And I was sharing with you, I remember when I came in this role about 17 years ago, and I immediately began to look as a church planting director that for a span of a long time, after 5 years, only 27% of our church plants were still there. And I went, this has got to change. What do we need to do to make sure? So I just started talking to people like Converge and my good friends there, and NAM and other church planting entities, and said, okay, what are you doing? And they began saying, well, you got to have good assessments, you got to have good training, you got to have good coaching, and you have to have a good support base. Well, what was interesting, the BMA's always had a great support base. Even our missionaries now that have to raise 100% of their support internationally, no one's gone longer than 6 months before they've had their support. When I tell that to other organizations, Drew, they're like, where do we sign up for this? That's awesome. It is. But we weren't assessing well, we weren't training well, we weren't coaching well. And so we began changing those systems because we wanted to equip. And that change was just something that God put on my heart in the same way he put on your heart for Temple to become South City with the vision that you had. So, and that all begins by seeking God's face and being willing to do whatever he asks us to do.
Yep, definitely. It's good stuff.
So one tool that we wanted to point everybody to is John Cotter has an excellent steps. And I even sent you the graphic. And if our listeners, matter of fact, Drew, you might even be able to attach that to the show notes. I don't know.
I will try, yeah.
Yeah, we'll try. But if not, if you Google it.
I can list the steps if nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. But if you Google leading change, you can get exactly what we're talking about. And John Cotter has just been an individual that's kind of if you will, a sensei of leading change. And what does that look like? And he leads you through 3 stages. And the first stage has 3 steps, the second stage 3 steps, and then the last stage 2. But it just kind of gives you a process to think through. And the first one is creating a climate for change. What's that look like? What do you need to do? Yeah. How do you develop that? You have to create an urgency. I did that in our missions department by saying, this is not acceptable. When we send people out, we need to send them as equipped as we possibly can. Now, I think you'd agree with me. We're never fully ready.
Right. No, because we need to be dependent upon the Lord. And for my story is every single step, seeking him and him wanting me to not try and get too far ahead, but just stay in him, keep my head down and seeking him as he provides each step. And that's still what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I knew, or I felt like you would say that, and that's exactly it. If you wait till you're fully ready, you'll never move forward. There is a step
Right.
of faith that is required, and you
Yep.
cannot get around that.
And I think not, there's a step of faith in the beginning, but there's an ongoing steps of faith because
Yes.
different elements of change and different levels of change, even as the graphic shows us. But you're going to come up to different idols and different things that are sacred cows, if you will, in the church, and different things that you go, oh, are we gonna address that? Well, if it means that we need to make change and move through this, then yeah, we do, and those are going to take steps of faith each time.
Yeah, I remember one time in our advisory meeting, our board for our missions department, 15 pastors out of our work, and I love working with John David Smith because he's a leader and he's going to
Mm-hmm.
lead change. And he was leading us through this one big, big, major change. And I knew I could go to battle with him when he said this. We were talking, and one of the men asked a great question. Well, when we're asked about this, what should we say? And John David leaned forward and looked down to the end of the table and he said, the truth always works. Just tell them the truth. And this is why we are doing that. And what was he doing? He was getting a coalition of the willing. He was saying,
Yeah.
okay, who's on board? And that's what Cotter says. You've got to get those on board. And I've been on this journey with you from Temple to South City, and I watched you do that. And I could name some of the names of those people that you knew, hey, I got to have conversations with these people. And if you're going to lead change, don't just get up and announce it and shock everybody. When you bring it up, there ought to be people sitting out there going, oh, yeah, we've talked about this. We've discussed this.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a good one. We've prayed about this together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I think all those things are true. And I think there's a sense also in that environment, there's going to be probably already some sense of urgency. In other words, we don't have kids anymore. We're the babies. We're the young people in our church. They don't exist anymore. All we have is old people. All we have are, those kinds of things are going to create a sense of tension in the church. And so that catalyst comes along and just sometimes states the obvious. Hey, maybe you're noticing we don't have young people. Maybe you're noticing we haven't, put water in that baptistry for the last 5 years. Those kinds of things are just acknowledging what's happening in that environment of urgency and speaking to it, speaking the truth. But that old saying I was saying about this when you were talking a minute ago, that says you can't stay where you are and go with God.
Yeah.
That whole thing, like there has to be some element of him moving, him working, and are we going to follow, or are we going to stay where we're going to stick it in the ground and go, no, this is what we think is most important. And now that you've made your statement about who your God is, really.
Yeah. And you brought up Nehemiah earlier before we got on. But think about it. What was he saying? The present condition and state is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he was saying. We cannot stay here. This needs to, here's the word, this needs to change.
Yep. Right.
And I love it because what you're saying, Drew, is if we're going to change and move forward with God, there has to be honesty and transparency.
Right. Right.
And that has
that's why I
to
love the
occur in our
mission of Jesus.
relationship with him and in our relationship with others.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good.
So in that first stage, then you want to create a vision for change. So create urgency, form the coalition of the willing, a powerful coalition of the willing, then create a vision for change. But then you want to begin engaging and enabling others. You want to start bringing more and more people on board. You want to begin to communicate the vision, and you want to empower action by having, hey, here's the steps. Here's what we think we need to do. We don't have all the steps, We're not,
Right.
we don't have it all figured out, but we do know here are the first steps that we need to take, and then celebrate when those steps are taken and wins occur. That's how you gain that momentum and you celebrate and you begin talking about, man, look what God is doing.
Right. There's an excitement that begins when you begin to follow the Lord in the direction He's moving in you. And the people begin to pick up on that. You give language to it. There's words and phrases that now the whole body goes, no, this is where we're going. This is who we are. I'll never forget, we did a video early on and interviewed some of our older folks with the video, and they were talking about the baptisms, and the kids and those things. It was like they could feel the change, but they were okay with it because it was mission centric. It was focused on the Great Commission of Jesus, not just on keeping what we want to stay the same, And that built an excitement.
Absolutely, Drew. And I think you want to develop a language, because don't forget, language does change culture. We need to think that through. And I know in the office, I just began to think, okay, how do we want to multiply? How do we want to multiply? And just talking and seeking the face of the Lord and getting good resources and good mentorship. I just began to say, how can every local church be involved in multiplication? And I came up with P5 multiplication. That's quite simple, but you pray. Then you prepare. You say, well, we're not ready to multiply. Okay. Well, what are you going to do to get ready to multiply? What's that look like? Mm-hmm. And then you want a partner. You're not ready to multiply. Well, who can you help right now? Who is multiplying, and who can you learn for? So pray, prepare, partner, and then maybe it's you that God wants to go lead that change, or plant, or revitalize, or replant, whatever that looks like. And then what can your church do to actually parent another congregation? And so what do all 5 of those things look like? So you can begin thinking through, because I just want to tell everybody, if you're going to change, you got to have a plan. And that plan's going to be tweaked all the time.
Yeah, no, it's good. I was going to just give a quick example.
Sure.
Just for clarity, we talked about language. You were talking about language. Yeah. And I think just to give an example, you could say things like, well, we have Sunday school and we have worship. And those things are wonderful. But maybe a change is to say, hey, we want to talk about discipleship. And so that is the thing we want to see happen, and the way we do it is through Sunday school and worship or other aspects. But you begin to make a little tweak, and hey, what's important to us is discipling people, not just attendance or something. We want to see people grow in their faith and their understanding and life in Jesus. And so those little language tweaks help move that mission of change on.
Yeah, I saw a picture, I think it was on Twitter, which isn't Twitter anymore, it's X. I'm confused. But anyway,
yes, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I get up one morning and my whole logo and everything had changed. I'm like, okay, let's move on. But anyway, I saw a great picture yesterday. I got to go back and find it because I want to save it. And I won't get it exactly right, but here's what he said. He said, success is not how many you have in church. Success is those who have come to church whose lives are being transformed. Whether that's city groups, or we call them connection groups, but getting the focus back, not on just being a spectator and watching, but what's going on in your life. We got to get the focus. You did that with that terminology. We stopped calling our groups meet on Sunday mornings, but I don't want them called Sunday school, because it's not about information transfer. But it also fits our vision statement, because our vision statement is centered on Him, connected to one another, compassion for our city. And I wanted to be able to say the best way to get connected at Cornerstone is through a connection group. That's where life transformation and discipleship's going to take place. That's where you're really going to be connected. And so that was what we did to try to change the culture. And so if you're leading change, think about your language, because that's really where it begins. And let me throw this out too, Drew, and make sure your language is positive, not negative.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that fits along with your number 4, communication for buy-in. That's what we're talking about, and enabling that action or them moving forward. I think those fit right in that.
They do. And then the last level that Cotter talks about in leading change is implementing and sustaining it. And I do want us to talk about in another podcast, and I even have the notes already open up, but as you grow, whatever that looks like, it's not about a number, but as growth is occurring, are you developing systems that will sustain that growth? What does that look like? Just like you have planned out triads and how those triads multiply. Because if we don't get wider as we get bigger, I can tell you're not going to sustain the growth. If we don't have a track to show them, and I'm not talking about a program, I'm talking about discipleship, I'm talking about accountability. If we don't have a system in place, it's so easy to become disconnected. Don't you agree?
No question. And I think what we have to begin to measure is like you said, not the number or the attendance of something, but the depth of those attending. And that number will, I think I can say this, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, that number I think will always be smaller probably than the service or the big group, because people have to individually make a choice to take up their cross and deny themselves and to be disciples of Jesus. And that's going to be a smaller number, right? We know that, but those are the numbers that matter most. And so what we do ought to lead towards showing that number matters most, and the things we do ought to support what matters most, not the support of what doesn't matter most. If I'm not trying to be not make a clear point here, but sometimes we support the big crowds instead of the deep discipleship, and I think that's when change needs to begin to happen.
Well, let me address that, and I haven't thought this totally out, so I may get in trouble here, but let me play.
I do it every week. Come on in. The water's fine.
Let me play with numbers a little bit. So maybe, okay, you're not going to be able to turn your thing upside down overnight. You're not.
No.
But maybe you could start here. Okay, our morning worship has grown by 10%. Well, has your discipleship grown by 10%? Okay, maybe, again, because you said it, you're not going to get all of them to plug in there. That number is going to be smaller. But shouldn't it be growing also? And if it's not growing at the same rate, what's broke? And what do we need to do different to help other people to understand and to plug in? And, because so often somebody will come to a leader in the church, say, hey, I want to be disciple. What's that look? Well, just keep coming.
Right.
Just keep coming. That's it. There's not a discipleship pathway. So another podcast that we need to talk about. Right. But, as you're leading change, John David Smith yesterday in this conference gave 4 thoughts that I shared with you, and I just want us to talk about them because, okay, you're leading the change. Get this chart, look it through, develop a track. But here's some things to think about as a leader. Number 1, empathize with your people who struggle with change. Empathy is it's so important. Man, listen to them. Understand. Realize. Let's talk temple for a second. I know there were people sitting there going, my kids were baptized here. My grandkids were baptized here. You're shaking your head like you heard that.
Well, I was one of them.
Exactly.
People don't think that, but I was,
Yeah. And here's what John David said that I loved. Every time there's a change, somebody sees it as a loss. Drew, when my dad passed away in 2005, my mom, her health was not good. But I was having to run to Florida to help her fix this, help her fix that. And I finally said, Mom, I can't keep doing this. I'm not telling you to sell, but we got to come up with another plan. So she decided to sell. Now, Drew, I knew it was the right thing. I knew it was the best thing. But I'm going to get teary-eyed because when I walked in and I shut the door on that house that we moved into when I was a seventh grader, it was like a part of my life was over. I had no idea. I told Shelby it was one of the hardest things I ever do to walk out and just pull that door behind me because that change was so dramatic, you know. My dad had lived there for, 30 plus years, you know. And I know others could give a longer history of, where they grew up because we were a military family. But I had no idea it was going to impact me. And hear me, I knew it was right. Yeah. I knew it was best. But that didn't mean there wasn't a loss in that change.
Right. I think that's a beautiful example, and I'll never forget one of our really leading men in the congregation came to me, older gentleman in his 80s, years ago, and he said, "Hey, forgive me. I'm just a guy that grew up in a little church, and I love hymns, even though we still do hymns. I love hymns, and I love the way we did church, and I'm struggling, and I got it." And I said, "Hey, I understand. Yeah. I totally understand. I wish you'd stay." He was basically telling me he was leaving, and I said, "I wish you'd stay, and I wish you would help us grow and go in the direction God wants us to grow. But I understand." And that's to not have that empathy for people and see the difficulty in the change, honestly, is just to be a jerk. It's just all about you.
Exactly.
And I don't want that to be said of me. I weep over people when they leave. Yeah. And I'm listen, I'm human. I'm a human being, and sometimes I get angry and mad and frustrated, and sometimes I even sin, and God forgive me for it, based on the feelings I have when they leave.
Sure.
But in many cases, even the difficult ones, I understand. And so I think it's important for us to be caring and empathetic in those moments.
It is.
It doesn't mean you keep going. It doesn't mean you don't, say, okay, I see, I understand, but God's called me to this. We've got to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it is hard. And you know what? Leadership, sometimes you feel a little schizophrenic, almost like Moses. Because Moses cracks me up, Drew. He does. One minute he's going, just kill them, God. I'm so tired of their griping and complaining. And then the next moment, in the next scene, he's going, oh, God, these are your people. Don't do that.
Right.
And that just shows you his heart. He was real. And by the way, I want to go on record. I know you personally, and you are very human. I just want to agree with you.
Yeah, there's many people agreeing with you now. Yeah.
Me too. So number 2, explain, and I'm going to put 2 other things with it. Explain, explain, and explain. Mm-hmm. You just need to, and here's a great leadership principle. If you'll answer as many questions up front as you possibly can, you can't answer them all, it'll head off a lot. It won't head it all off, but if you can answer as many questions up front, now be honest, if you don't know the answer, tell them, I'm not sure. We haven't figured that out yet. This is where we're headed, this is where we're going, and it's going to be a little messy along the way, but I love your statement, clarity is kindness. The clearer we can be, the more productive our leadership will be in the process of the change.
Absolutely. And I'll just give a couple of suggestions that I've seen in churches. We're trying to do some as we can, as we've learned. Some churches approach this with white papers. One church I was a part of in the past would do these white papers on topics of change or topics of theological distinction. This is where we are. This is why we're doing it. This is what we believe. This is a scriptural precedent for it. And then they can post that on their website or put it in their office. And as people ask the questions over and over again, you as a pastor don't have to go, well, let's meet again and let's talk over. You can do those things, and those times are needed. But you can also, hey, why don't you take this and read through this first? Or now a new way to do this is churches are doing podcasts or recordings like this, and you can explain and share your heart, and you can post it on YouTube. And it doesn't have to be a public post. You can post things on YouTube. Only people that you send that link to will get. And therefore, it allows you to help communicate what's going on so that you don't have to continue to explain it or be in person every time you have to answer those kinds of things. There's just a couple of tips on how to do that.
That's excellent, because here's the statement I wanted to get to, which you just explained so well. If people believe in the why, they'll accept the what. And that's exactly what you're trying to get people to see. Let them, hey, this is where we get, this is why we do this. I had a lady in my office the other day, Drew, and she said, why do y'all immerse? You know, why in baptism, why do you immerse? Yeah. I love the question, because I was able to show her the why. This is why we do it this way. And if we can't answer the why when people ask us, uh-oh. Uh-oh. Matter of fact, last year at Recharge, and we're going to have Recharge, here's my shameless advertisement, October 4th through the 6th. Get it in the show notes at bmaamerica.org/recharge. Pastors, wives, leaders in the church, associates, whatever. Small group leaders, sign up and come. We'd love to have you. Drew's leading the worship. Buddy Mullins, who sings with the Booth Brothers, is going to be our entertainment on Wednesday night. Bill Ellis going to be preaching on God-initiated leadership. And I'd love for y'all to come. Now I don't remember where I was going, but I did get my shameless advertisement for Recharge in.
That's awesome. Yes, I would just put a ditto on that. Come if you can.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. But I don't know exactly where I was going, but I do. Last year at Recharge, I was asked by a couple people, why do you do this in this conference? And I looked at them and I went, can I be blunt? They said, sure. I said, I guess because it's the way it's always been done. And well, would you mind changing a couple of things? And it was real simple. It was, we were doing Tuesday through Thursday, and they said, you know, with us being bivocational, if you do it Wednesday through Friday, then we'd also have Saturday. We wouldn't have to take 5 days off of work. We don't have to. And I said, that's a great idea. So we're trying it this year. We're going to go Wednesday to Friday. And then somebody else said, man, don't bring us in after a full day of travel and preach at us. Let us get a deep breath. So this year we're going to kick it off with a banquet and a concert by Buddy. And I went, great. You know what? I couldn't answer the why, Drew. I couldn't. I was I don't know. And so we tried to change it. So that's where I was headed.
Well, I think that's a good example. If you can't answer the why, maybe it's time to ask some questions. If you can't have a clear a directive of this is why we do what we do, then go, well, maybe we need to reconsider why we do what we do. Maybe that's something that's up for change.
So as you empathize and as you explain, keep casting the vision. Have the vision that God has given you as the catalytic leader, and keep casting that vision and keep leading the way. And I know we're getting a little close on time, so I'll give the other two real quick, and then you kick in wherever you want to. But be patient. Be patient. I would advise you, the more major the change is, the more you need to slow down. And I think you would agree. Because I watched you and I saw that. And it's not about forcing it down your throat. It's not about, come hell or high water, we're gonna do this no matter what you think. Because it's not about us. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's the Lord's church. So be patient. I'm thankful he's long-suffering with me, and has been patient with me. And then the last thing, and notice we put it last, and then give people options. You've got to realize, and I love what you said earlier, hey, I want you to be a part of this, but I do understand. I get it. But as you go through all four of these, not everybody's going to go on the journey with you. That's just a part of it, because they see the loss as greater than the product of the change you're leading. And so they're just not going to be able to recover from that. And unfortunately, sometimes, and I'm going to say it, nostalgia is stronger than Scripture. Because we get so caught up in the forms more than we focus on the function. And that's where change comes out. Hey, the function, discipleship, leadership development, that's where we're wanting to go. And what the form is secondary to the function. And that's what you said earlier. Hey, we got to look around. We don't have kids. We don't have this. We don't have that. Something's wrong. Something's broke, because it's not functioning the way it should. But man, sometimes those traditions and those forms carry far more weight than what the Scripture actually says in that area.
No, I couldn't have said it any better. I totally agree. This has been a great conversation, and we know it's a difficult one.
Yes.
And if we can help, we would be more than happy to pray with you or give you some suggestions if you're interested in that. info@healthychurchpodcast.com is the email address. Of course, you can find us on Facebook, and we are praying for change, not for change's sake, but for the sake that we would see more people come to know Jesus, more churches aligned with the mission of Jesus to make disciples. That's what this podcast is about, not just so we can talk to each other every week, but that we can see the church move forward in health and growth aligned with Jesus and his heart for people. So thank you so much for listening today. We appreciate it. We will talk to you next time on the podcast.
For more information and other resources, go to healthychurchpodcast.com.